Well, welcome everyone, and welcome to Hammersmith and Fulham's full council meeting. And it's good to see so many people here. And I'd like to welcome our guests and all those who are watching tonight's evening's live stream on YouTube. I'm Councillor PJ Murphy, and I'm fortunate enough to be the Mayor of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. Unfortunately, under current legislation, councillors at home can't speak or vote on decisions tonight. And tonight we have 7 decision reports, items 6.1 to 6.7, and only people in the chamber can speak or vote on them. And so my apologies to those that are at home and can't. But thank you for joining us. It is appreciated. By participating in tonight's remote meeting, you're consenting to being recorded. Please be aware that if your microphone is unmuted, our viewers will be able to hear your contributions and asides. And if your camera is on, please assume you're being broadcast to YouTube, so your family, friends, electors to watch at leisure. So just some general points for running the meeting, please, to ensure we run smoothly. Within the chamber, please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. If the whip has not provided me with your name and when you wish to speak, please raise your hand and wait until I call you. If you wish to raise a point under standing orders, please raise your hand or use the raise hand facility, and I'll invite you to speak at a suitable point. And when called to speak, please state the standing orders under which you wish to speak. Please wait patiently and don't interrupt the person speaking. If you wish to raise a point of order or personal explanation, you may interrupt the councillor speaking. However, please ensure your points are factual, brief, and to the point. For councillors joining us on Zoom, please ensure your camera is on throughout the meeting, unless you have a connection issue. And if you do, please email David and he'll help you to resolve them. And can all members in the chamber please wear their masks unless they're speaking. I also ask members to keep their speeches brief and to the point. A timer will be in operation, and I'll indicate when you have 1 minute left, and again when your time is up, the lights in front of us. When the traffic light is amber, you have less than 1 minute to speak. When it turns red, please stop your speech. It'll save me interrupting you. If you're watching at home and would like to follow along with the agenda, there's a link in the description on YouTube. And may I ask members speaking to remain seated when they're speaking to allow people watching from home to see the speaker clearly. Administration councillors in the back row, however, will need to stand when speaking, and perhaps on the opposition side as well. So we move under item 1, which is apologies for absence. And apologies for absence have been received from councillors Adam Connell, Rachel Layton, and Patricia Quigley. Are there any other absences? No?
Mr. Mayor, we've got apologies for lateness from Councillor Rebecca Harvey.
Thank you very much indeed. And just on those apologies for absence, it's worth noting all 3 are suffering from COVID. So for those of us that think COVID is gone, it's not. So please do take the normal precautions. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Okay. Item 3, the minutes. Is it the wish of the council that I sign the minutes of the council meeting held on the 19th of January 2022? Thank you. Mayor's announcement, item 4. Please note that an additional exempt urgent item has been added to the agenda, which will be discussed in private session. The report has been circulated to all members. If you have any questions on this item, please wait until we get to it. And for those at home, if you stay on the Zoom link you're currently on, we'll move you automatically into that meeting. There's no need to change to any other one. I would now like to invite the leader and the leader of the opposition to address the chamber on the Ukraine crisis. Councillor Cowan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I rise to speak with a very clear message tonight that the people of Hammersmith and Fulham stand very clearly in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. This is an unprovoked attack. It is unusual in Europe to see the use of military force used to terrorize a free democratic citizenry and applied by a thug who has a very thorough reputation of dismantling Russian democracy and setting about trying to dismantle other Western democracies. It is not long ago that we saw the attack on Georgia. It is not long ago that we saw attack on British soil, both in central London and in Salisbury. Russia's Putin is no friend of Western democracies and needs to be robustly rebutted. I speak very clearly on the basis that many people in Hammersmith and Fulham who have settled here and made it their home are Ukrainian. And they have sisters and brothers in the Ukraine, and mothers and fathers and cousins and friends who are facing the fear of trying to work out whether they will be alive by the end of this conflict. It is simply not acceptable that should be happening in Europe in this day and age. So our message is that your sisters and brothers are our sisters and brothers, and we will resolutely work with you to face down this Russian threat. And that means complete sanctions, cutting out Russian influence in the UK economy. It means a coordinated response from NATO that leaves Mr. Putin in no doubt that we stand united and resolute to face him down should he attack any other country or think he can carry on this campaign of terror. It's not just people in the Ukraine who are worried tonight. It's people all over the world, but particularly those that border the Ukraine. And so again, I say to our NATO allies and to their relatives and friends who live in Hammersmith and Fulham, that we recognize those in Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova are all going to feel particularly vulnerable in this particularly dark time. I am in my 50s. I am one of a generation of people who have grown up with the luxury of democracy and the assurance that my liberties will be protected by the rule of law, that power will transfer by a ballot box and not by a gun. And that's what the Ukrainian people chose just a couple of decades ago when they chose to celebrate the values of the Enlightenment and join the democratic family. History is very clear. And we talk about the greatest generation that faced down similar autocrats in the past, but it has been theoretical for us largely up until now. And so I think we need to speak with one voice, because what we know is autocracies that attack democracies, it's never, ever the first, just the final step. It is always the first. So our message tonight to everyone in Hammersmith and Fulham, from all the different backgrounds, from all the countries I just mentioned, is that we stand with you. We send you our sorrow, and we will petition our government to take the strongest possible measures to work with our NATO and European allies to make sure this incursion ends in disaster for Mr. Putin. Thank you very much.
Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Leader of the Opposition has asked me to address the Council on this. The Arsenalsk tube station in Kiev is one of the deepest in the world. If you come out and you walk towards the Motherland statue in the park beyond, you go along a street called Luhansk Street. And on the left in a park is a very modest memorial and small exhibition. It's certainly modest in comparison to Stalin's great gift to Ukraine, the motherland statue, 200 meters high. But it commemorates the between 4 and 8 million Ukrainians who died during the Holodomor, starved to death by their largely Russian neighbors. One can understand there the history when the president of the Russian Republic talks about history. You can understand the history there. There are plenty of other very moving monuments and things to see in Kiev, notably Babi Yar, famous Babi Yar, site of the massacre of some 30 to 40,000 Ukrainian Jews in a ravine on the outskirts of Kiev. But altogether, there were about 1 million Jews who lost their lives to German aggression, Nazi aggression during the Second World War. And one of the more moving sites in the National Museum in Kiev that you can see is a very large bone-crushing machine that the Nazis used to dispose of the skeletons of their victims because they couldn't do it manually. They needed machines to help them do it. So in terms of genocide, and the president of the Russian Republic talks about there being a genocide by the Ukrainians against the regions, Luhansk and Donetsk in the eastern part of the country. The Ukrainians know fully well what it means to be a victim of genocide. They are not a country a long way away, of which we know little. We know a lot. There are fellow Europeans. They're a very civilized nation, and indeed, even in the Russian, go back to Russian history, it's believed that the cradle of Russian civilization, the Rus people, originated from Ukraine. They are a heavily European country. We fly sometimes a single EU flag on our town hall. But if you go to Kiev, there are tens of thousands of European flags. They know where they want to be and where their loyalties lie. There's not a lot we as councillors in Hammersmith and Fulham can do about this. Plainly, our government will and its partners will try to make the Russians pay a penalty for this. Ultimately, the Ukrainians will resist successfully, whether it's in this war or over the longer period. They've done it. It took them many years to get rid of the Germans and many years to get rid of the Soviets, but they managed it eventually. And they will prevail, whether in the shorter or the longer term. All we can do is to give them our thoughts and prayers. And thoughts and prayers, it's an expression that we come to, it's a slightly trite expression at times. But in these circumstances, here as councillors, we can only give them our thoughts and prayers. There are many people who are literally dying for the sort of democracy that we represent in this council chamber today. So I would ask you, I'm not asking us to do a 1 minute silence or whatever, but when we go from the council chamber tonight, certainly to give them our thoughts and prayers, because they very much deserve and need it tonight. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much. Item 5, public questions. I'd like to thank John O'Connell Williamson, who submitted a question to tonight's meeting. Unfortunately, he's not able to attend, so a written response will be sent to him and included in the minutes. We move on to item 6, which is the committee reports. Item 6.1, the revenue budget and council tax levels, is on page 29. I call upon the leader to move the report and recommendations.
Formally moved.
Thank you. The agreed convention is the leader of the council and the leader of the opposition have unlimited time to speak on this report, and up to 3 other speakers from each side can speak for 5 minutes each. Councillor Cowan will then sum up. I call on the leader of the council, Councillor Stephen Cowan, to speak. Councillor Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, as we meet tonight, families and citizens across our borough face an unprecedented cost of living crisis. Food bills are up already by about £30 a week for many of our neighbours across the borough. We have the highest inflation now for 30 years. The worst cost of living squeeze in 60 years. And we see rocketing energy bills and taxes, government taxes, that are about to hit households around Hammersmith and Fulham. It is without doubt a challenging time. And as we already know, many people are struggling to pay their bills and to make their household finances balance. These are unusual things to be happening, and we can blame Brexit or blame COVID or blame the government, but they are happening, and they're happening to people in Hammersmith and Fulham. So I am pleased that tonight, with this document and the votes that will surely follow, we in Hammersmith and Fulham will freeze council tax. And I want to put that in some context, because I appreciate that local government finance is a complicated matter and it's not always accessible to everybody. So most council financing comes from central government. That's where it has always come from for a variety of different schemes. And since 2010 to 2011, that has been cut in real terms by a staggering 54%. Now, I just want to put that in context a little bit, because I've always worked in the business sector, in the private sector. And there it's slightly different. You try and sell things and bring in revenue, and then you try and manage the cost while trying to adjust to market changes. But there's very few businesses I know that can cope with a 54% real terms cut in their funding. In fact, what happens in our market economy is many of those businesses go bankrupt. And if we then say, well, when did this majority of funding get cut? Well, the majority of funding has been cut since the year 2014-15, where that real terms reduction is 33%. Now, if the business analogy doesn't work, imagine this for your household bill. Imagine what conversations you will have with your family if your income drops by 33% or 54%. Think about, you start off cancelling the luxuries. You start off cancelling the holidays, maybe. You know, maybe you cut back on trips out to restaurants or bars or the cinema or theatre or any of the other things that enrich your life and make it better. But if it gets really bad, you then begin to worry about how you pay the mortgage, how you pay the rent, how you pay the food bill. And so these are real things. I know they're numbers, but they are very real situations. And councils across the country, as a consequence, have struggled. In 2015, up until 2015, the government used to pay councils, and it used to pay this council, millions of pounds to cut or freeze council tax. Now, I look back on those days, having been in charge of this borough for nearly 8 years, and just think how much better it must have been to have not just much more money, but a grant specifically to cut or freeze council tax. But those days are long gone. And to put it in absolute terms, in 2010, our budget was 184 million. in 2022, 2023, which is the budget we're setting, our budget is 125 million. Now, anybody, even a primary school child starting off learning arithmetic for the first time, will tell you with a straight face that is a significant cut, a very significant cut. And it's fallen to us on these benches since 2014 to deal with those challenges and to deal with them in a way that sees our values of being on the side of our residents put front and centre in everything we do. Other councils around the country have had to put council tax up. Now, in real terms, that's by about 4%. So you can see councils struggling to pay services, struggling to keep up with inflation, struggling to recruit staff and pay them salaries with those staff with their own worries. 4% in real terms over that period seems fairly realistic for most people. And I think that's a reasonable thing to do. But here in Hammersmith and Fulham, we haven't put council tax up by 4%. In real terms, council tax is now 9% lower than we came into office. 9% lower than when we came into office. And this year, a real terms cut. Now, those people who don't understand economics, then I'm telling you what that means is that people have more money in the pocket because Hammersmith and Fulham Labour won an election in 2014-15 and have delivered the best value council in Great Britain. And as we all know, you can buy things cheaply and they're not always there in the quality. So you might say, well, what services have you cut? And how many protests have you had for all those cuts? And I'm long enough in the tooth to remember lots of protests and to hear people on the opposition benches, then the administration benches, explaining that you had to get tough, which is why you had to hike Meals and Wheels prices up, which is why you had to introduce home care charges, which is why you had to sell off community centres or sell off Fulham Town Hall for £8 million. All of these things, we sat for years, for 8 long years, and heard those explanations of the dreadful things that were happening because they kept saying it was the only way forward. Well, there is another way, because not only have we cut council tax, we've cut 85% of all council charges. Again, that's quite a feat. There are many ways council charge people, and we've cut 85% of them. Take the parking, much talked about, okay? We have frozen the resident visitor parking permit at £1.80 for 7 years. This is the 7th year we've frozen it. And actually, if anybody who attended a PAC or read the papers or understood the parking would know that if you are a resident and someone is visiting you, then you can apply and use the smart permit, which means your visitors can park in Hammersmith and Fulham. Might be a child, might be a brother, might be a plumber, might be an electrician, could be anybody you want to have around your house, but they can park at some of the lowest figures anywhere in London. Again, underlining that we're on your side. Now, I stood here as leader of the opposition, as people will well remember, and confronted our opponents about a 55% increase in parking one year. And when we won control of the council, the very first advice we were given, the very first week I was in office, was we needed to put parking up immediately by 14.7%, because that's what had been planned and that's what was part of the 14-15 budget. And as clear as day, when I walked into the Labour group office and said, what do you think about this, everybody? There was a very clear reaction, which was, we're not doing it. So we've been putting more money back in our residents' pockets. And that's been a very good thing. But we've not just put money into residents' pockets, we've added value to their lives too. And of course, we abolished home care charges as soon as we got in, because it was a tax on disability. Whether that disability came through age, and you may find yourself suffering dementia of some type, and all of a sudden the bill would come through demanding that you remortgaged your house, I thought that was wrong. You've paid into the system all your life. You shouldn't have to do it. We are on your side. We abolished it. Or whether you've had a disability and society thought the best thing it could do was to tax you so you could live an accessible life, using the medical model rather than the social model of disability. And we think that's wrong because our value is everyone should have access to a full life. So it is stunning that we spend almost £25 million each year in maintaining one of the best adult social care services in the British Isles. And I'm extremely grateful to Lisa Redfern and her stunning team of highly professional people who have not only delivered that, but has improved services and are very keen to deliver a proper health and care service as we move forward into the next administration, should residents endorse our programme of change. And not only has the cuts happened to local government and we found this extra money to abolish home care charges, we understand what our residents face on the street. I don't mind telling you a secret. I like to watch Country File. Sometimes I get in, and if it's been a stressful day, you can flick on Country File and you might find out a very interesting thing about the re-emergence of the peacock butterfly, or a new type of cheese that's being made, or something else that's equally relaxing. It is a shock that when I went through that normal routine just over a month ago, that item number 2 was on the extent of county lines, criminal organised gangs in the countryside and the rural communities. A horrible story of a young person that had been murdered by the drug gang that he had been associated with. Crime, violent crime, organised crime is up over the last 12 years, no matter what figures the Prime Minister tells Parliament. It is up and people are frightened of it, and they're frightened of it here in Hammersmith and Fulham, just as they're frightened of it across our country. And when our police team was merged with Westminster, we found our police were only in Westminster. And so we took a different path. We decided to take on the burden of crime fighting. Now, again, people don't necessarily understand what councils' roles are to do, and it is not crime fighting. That is done by the national and regional government. So this year, we have put 70 new law enforcement officers onto the streets, patrolling the streets. I have been out with them. I've introduced them to residents. I've seen how residents react to them. It makes people feel safer, and it is crucial to fighting crime. Not only are they out patrolling the streets, we've trained them on crime fighting. So they've gone through a rigorous training course. Not only are they trained, and you can shake your head, but no Conservative administration ever did it, and it's the best option in London at the moment. They have CCTV cameras on all of their tops, automatically allowing them, when they're interviewing people, to feed directly into our CCTV control room, where we have super recognizers, spotting people and working out what's happening on the streets. They are the eyes and ears, a crucial part of our intelligence in cracking down on crime and adding an extra resource that wouldn't be there if we hadn't put it there. And anyone who doesn't think it's a good idea, talk to the residents, because they do. But standalone, it wouldn't work just by themselves, which is why at the same time as funding our law enforcement officers, we have also funded a first of its kind gangs unit, one of the most extensive in Britain, made up of expert social workers and expert police officers, a joint operation that allows us to go in and stop children being conscripted and press ganged into criminal gangs. Now, that's what used to happen. It used to be that one time children were coerced, were groomed into gangs, but now they're press ganged, now they're threatened, now their family are threatened. That's what's happening on the streets of Hammersmith and Fulham. As you drive home, or you cycle home, or you walk home tonight, look around you. It's happening in the darkest, shadowiest corners, and it's simply got to stop. Our gangs unit has already been intrinsic to having 600 county lines gang members caught in a joint operation with the police. And much of the information we're picking up is coming from our other sources of the LEPS team and the biggest investment in CCTV this borough has ever known. Now, how is it that we invest more in crime and we invest significant more in crime when our budget's being cut? Well, we can come on to that. But it's not just crime fighting that is a priority, because keeping safe, as it was through COVID, has always been a priority for this administration. But we're also building genuinely affordable homes. And our campaign for homes for residents, not overseas investors, I don't think has ever been more important, because many of those overseas investors are coming from the Russian Federation. People have made money and want to put it into the London property market, sometimes laundering their money, sometimes just because it's a good investment. But it has an adverse effect on housing, and it keeps British citizens and British residents from settling here and building lives here because it overinflates the market. And we have taken a tough approach to property developers, and it includes not only not taking a penny in hospitality, because I don't think there's ever such a thing as a free lunch, and I don't know how anyone could ever take a meal from Capco or any of the other people who once ran around Hammersmith and Fulham thinking they owned the place. It's important because there is no such thing as a free lunch, because the reason they're buying you lunch is to influence you and to coerce you, even if you don't think it's happening. So we don't take hospitality, and we ban lobbyists. Why do you need people to come in from the property industry and try and schmooze us? Well, we don't. We say, if you want to do business in Hammersmith and Fulham, come and talk to us. Come and talk to our officials, and we will talk. That approach has won us a staggering £686 million, a record for this borough, and money that's gone directly to our residents. As I often say to residents, to developers when we're negotiating with them, if you do well in this negotiation, you maybe get an even bigger multi-million pound bonus. If I do well, it goes to our residents, because I'm still on £38,000 a year. And that it remains the truth. We're fighting food poverty. I'm going to come on to that. But I think it is heartbreaking when you look at what's happening in our society. Talk to the principal, Sally Brooks, at the Fulham Cross Academy about the number of children going to school with aching bellies. And you can do nothing but step back and wonder how the fifth richest economy and can have that, and how we, in the heart of its capital city, can see it as a daily occurrence, something people are getting used to. So I'm glad that we've not only introduced free breakfast for all primary school children, but we've also introduced free lunches in the schools with the highest number of children experiencing deprivation. We don't want people to feel any sense of humiliation because they're getting something for free. Our message to children struggling, and to those parents, often mums, who are going without food, as they have done throughout history, to make sure their children get the food they can't afford, is we're on your side, and we're going to step in during what is a crisis in your life. And that's what that investment does to our free school breakfast program. And if you talk to the food banks, who we funded the opening of the White City Food Bank, and we invested record amounts in their operation. It is a great shame that Daphne has now left and retired, but she retired after constructing the most successful series of food banks anywhere in Britain. Now, on the one hand, that's quite good to have such an amazing social entrepreneur who would do that. And if you ask her, she will tell you that she's never found partners any more effective as us. And it's been, our privilege to work with her and to fund much of the activity she's done. But what type of country are we where we're having to give food? where you leave the supermarket and maybe you feel obliged to put some extra food to gift to your neighbours because you know people are desperate elsewhere in our community. How does that work when so many people are so wealthy in our society? Well, it shouldn't work, should it? And the 21st century shouldn't be like that. And the last 12 years should not have been like this. And it was therefore a privilege to meet the Duchess of Cornwall, who came to launch our Nourish project. It's cost us nearly 5 million, that project. How do you find £5 million when to fund the Nourish project that will help people grow food locally, that will collect food from organizations that made just as it's going to go, just as if they've got excess food, and that will turn that into fresh, nourishing meals. We'll either give them for free for people who turn up, or we'll charge people who want to pay and feel they should pay, and then teaches those people who might have been long-term unemployed how to be chefs or cooks or any of the other things that are so essential to getting their lives back up and running. How do you find the money? Well, I'll tell you how you find the money. You make it a priority to find the money. And that's what this Labour administration does. And our pioneering alliance with Imperial College London is doing amazing work. We could take credit for it as being politicians, but I think our approach to economics isn't to try and fix how things work. It's to create the right circumstances in the market economy to allow entrepreneurs and businesses to thrive. And I have been so encouraged talking to the different businesses on our industrial strategy board, because yes, they want to make profits, and yes, they want to be in what is emerging as a global economic hotspot because of the idea of doing a deal with Imperial to transform Hammersmith and Fulham into that type of operation. But when we talk with Lord Nash, who's an amazing member of our board, he is aligning everything that happens in his academy chain to the jobs that are coming out of White City. And indeed, he put me in touch with apprenticeship people who are working to make sure that if you, rather than go to university, you're going to go to a different path, then that path could be a well-funded job in an apprenticeship in one of the key anchor institutions that are in White City. And to show the goodness of these businesses and how people are determined to do the right thing, many of these businesses are talking about how do we share our apprenticeship levy in order to make sure that even the small startups and scale-ups get to take apprenticeships, and therefore we can make this amazing ecosystem that we're building in White City into the most exciting and the greatest opportunities for our residents anywhere in Britain. So that, I think, is not just about the money. And we put money into it. We put money into the website. We put money into lots of things. We put money into training. But it's also about our ability as the Labour politicians, as social democrats, are being able to facilitate a different type of economic model, one that's inclusive and then one that gives people the greatest opportunities in life. And we're number one in London for tackling climate change, having our strategy looked recently independently reviewed. We have the best record in Britain at divesting from fossil fuels, something people said was crazy when we set about doing it in 2014, but because of the determination, skill, and guile and intelligence of Councillor Cassidy, it's happened. And the only other governmental organisation that beats us at divesting from fossil fuels in Britain is not a council, because we're better than all of them. It's not any other organisation than the Environment Department. And I'm confident we'll catch up and overtake the Environment Department. So when you see the council tax cut, and you see the cuts in numbers, we've not had a single protest because we haven't cut a single service. We've not had one protest talking about cuts in services because there haven't been any. And I remember, I actually cannot remember of the number of cuts, but the number of people who came to complain about the former Conservative administration for cutting services, selling off assets, and then cutting services again. Every single year, cuts in services. Hammersmith and Fulham is proving you can deliver more for less. So how have we done it? Well, we know on this side because we take an active role in scrutinising the financing. And there is people turning up to all the policy and accountability committees who have completely used those organisations, those committees, to understand how the budget works. And we've done it by introducing a ruthless financial efficiency programme, a programme that has taken tough negotiations with contractors to win huge cuts in the funding. Take one example. When we came into office, our IT contract was 22 million and the most expensive in London and one of the most expensive in Britain. Now, ours is just around about 12 million and some of the best value in London. Just one contract. And you can see the types of numbers, but we've done that to every single contract. And we've stripped out layers of management. We've ended sharp practices. And we've tried to change the culture. Because our belief that culture eats strategy for breakfast is fundamental to how we change the way the organisation works on a day-to-day basis. But most importantly, we've risen to the challenges. We rose to the challenge of COVID, constructing the biggest volunteer group we've ever seen, but putting millions of pounds into frontline services and creating, in alliance with third sector organisations, the biggest support programme ever seen in this borough's history. And if it wasn't COVID in the last 2 years, then it was Hammersmith Bridge. Hammersmith Bridge. Thank God Wesley Harcourt commissioned a full integrity review in 2015. It took us some time to get it going because bringing in and procuring expert engineers is extremely challenging. But compared to the last administration, who spent just £63,000 in the time they were in, the last 4 years they were in office on Hammersmith Bridge, we spent nearly £16 million on Hammersmith Bridge because we brought in engineers after groups of engineers after groups of engineers who every time they found a different problem with this unique structure produced a series of solutions. And the solutions have been led by Hammersmith and Fulham Council, not the government, not even TfL. TfL helped, and they came up with some solutions. They could fix and repair the bridge for 166 million quid. 166, or possibly 140 if we wanted to do it over a longer period. And they could stabilize it and stop it falling into the river for £46 million. So it is brilliant that Sharon Lee should have gone to the private sector, as I asked her to do, and to sort different options. And it was only back on the 6th of December that we, in Hammersmith and Fulham, invested 8.9 million to crack on and get the bridge fixed. Now, the bridge has been a touchstone political issue. And I would simply say all those people that have sought to blame this administration, you know, we had Zach Goldsmith, I think at one point, standing on Hammersmith Bridge, explaining that he had found a plan for £5 million to fix Hammersmith Bridge. And he was going to build a new bridge, a temporary structure that could take cars, lorries, and buses. And he was going to do that, not in 4 or 5 years, you know, but in 3 months. Now, I think the problem with stuff like that is it took advantage of people who were desperate, particularly those people in Barnes who were worried about how they get into Hammersmith and Fulham. 5 million quid, which he later revised to 7 million quid, should have been kicked out of the park. It was nonsense. It was stupid. It may have even been deliberate nonsense, but it wasn't true. It definitely wasn't true. And what did we see happen from the government? Government minister after government minister stood on the bridge thinking it would influence the election in 2019. All the blame, all the hurrah. And what did we see from Greg Hands? Greg Hands, the MP for Fulham, at a meeting in July, I think it was, 2019, told the residents there, which quite a lot of our people were there, that Hammersmith and Fulham shouldn't get any help from the government. We should pay for Hammersmith Bridge all out of our parking accounts. And maybe it describes why the government's mismanagement of our economy is so much, because Greg was the Chief Secretary of the Treasury. But 25 million quid in the parking account at the time would not fix a 163 million pound bill of a bridge. And added to that, Hammersmith Bridge is the most expensive bridge in Britain to fix and one of the oldest suspension bridges in the world. So Greg still said that's how we should do it. And I think he told Grant Shapps to do that, because when one of our residents asked Grant Shapps, "Are you working with Greg Hands?" he said, "I'm working very closely with Greg Hands. I listen and take Greg Hands' advice an awful lot." And it wasn't just Greg Hands who said, "This is terrible. This is the Labour administration who broke this bridge." It was all of those people on the Conservative benches, some of them going on marches, "Give us our £7 million temporary bridge. Why won't Hammersmith and Fulham put up the 7 million quid? Well, I'll tell you why. It was never a real option, just like Santa Claus doesn't exist and there is no tooth fairy. It was never real, never real. I apologize to any children watching it. So it was absolute nonsense, absolute nonsense. And when Grant Shapps tells me when I meet him that we should put council tax up because we've got the third lowest council tax in Britain, he says to me, you can afford to put it up and your residents can afford to pay for it. When I say that would be £800 per resident, Mr. Secretary, he says, shrug. So all this talk of Conservatives being on the side of council taxpayers, just not true. Now, you'd think there'd be a united chamber on Hammersmith Bridge, wouldn't you? You'd think everyone would be like behind the scenes, behind the Speaker's chair, what can we do to help? Nope, they went on marches. They went on marches just as a second wave of COVID was happening. I looked at the photos, no social distancing, everybody, barber jackets, baskets, red sets of dogs. What a sight it was to see, crowded in, all of them out protesting the Labour administration because they thought that was how politics should be done. It is a disgrace. It is a type of treachery that at a time when we should be standing together to get our bridge fixed and to get the funding from government, this lot thought, let's play some cheap politics with it, especially when some of them had in some responsibility for the bridge in former lives. But we're fixing the bridge. The bridge heating system, which we put on, Hammersmith and Fulham paid for, has meant that it's stabilized. We have sensors all over the bridge. And that's meant that we know what happens at all circumstances. And so we have plenty of time if anything bad happens, such as a major heat wave, as happened 2 years ago. And we've put the heat system on, which now controls the way the temperature expands. And because of the work that's already begun, by September, we will be able to confidently say there will never be a risk of a bridge falling into the River Thames again. Now, what I think is quite a feat. The task force has one problem with it, which is it hasn't initiated any task. You know, there was a bit very early on after the task force was set up with the aim of knocking heads together and getting some action. The task force very quickly came to a reporting force where we would report to the minister, to TfL, to Richmond Council, who I invited in, and would tell them what's going on. And so it was more us telling them what we were doing and what we were spending. And whereas every other bridge in London cost about £10 million to fix, so it was 9.7 million to fix the Albert Bridge, 85% of that was paid by TfL. It was 9 million to fix Chiswick Bridge, all of that was paid by TfL. The bridges the minister often talked to me about in Lowestoft and Great Yarmouth, where 85% of that was paid by the government. So how is it that Hammersmith and Fulham get stuck with a 33% bill on potentially 163 million pound bridge? Party politics, and I blame many of these people here for that game playing that undermined the residents of our borough potentially for decades to come if we hadn't stood firm and taken a very different route. So when we look at what are we doing, we're introducing new services. We're changing the nature of the economy and bringing brand new opportunities. We're investing more each year in adult social care and in children's social care, keeping people safe. We're building alliances for change, so we're winning money from other people, not just from national government, whether it's through the industrial strategy or whether it's through tackling food poverty with our food bank friends and indeed with Nourish and others. and we're very firmly on the side of the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham. This message from this budget is, as you go to bed and you worry about what's happening with your finances and your household, how your household will manage, then we have a very clear message to you. We're on your side. We will always be on your side, and there will be other measures coming that help you get through these very difficult times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brocklebank-Fowler, you have a limited time as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are let down by Labour, who do things to residents, not with them. This is the unfortunate situation in which we residents find ourselves. Labour's second term has seen this administration consumed by its own socialist schemes to the detriment of our borough and us residents, and I will expand on this throughout. But first, let's contemplate on how domestic matters have improved since the last budget speeches in February 2021. Then the vaccination programme was only just starting. We were the first country to approve a vaccine, and its rollout from December 2020 was weeks ahead of the EU. Luckily, we are not, as Labour wanted, involved in the European vaccination procurement programme. The UK is now down to the 31st country in the world for deaths per million from COVID. Any death, however, is a great sadness, and there have been 372 COVID-related deaths in our borough up to the 11th of February. Our programme of vaccinations, including the booster vaccinations, had the fastest rollout in Europe. We want to thank the NHS, our world-class local hospitals, volunteers and scientists for this magnificent achievement. We should also not forget the good decisions made by the government, including Nadeem Zahawi, Kate Bingham and the Prime Minister. This has meant that life is gradually returning to normal, with the good news that from today, the last of the COVID restrictions have been lifted. The government has funded local government extremely generously during this pandemic, recognising rightly that extra duties to councils involve extra expense. I won't go through all the monies received, as that was done last year, but councils have been reimbursed or are being so. It was inevitable that the previous speech would focus mainly on the state of the national economy, which has obviously been affected by the pandemic and other world events, because you have very little to be proud about locally. The government is spending an extra £9 billion in order to mitigate the effect of rising prices on those with low incomes. Locally, it's time, though, that we look ahead to a brighter future, particularly after May the 5th, and we need a council which is innovative, caring, fairer, greener and cleaner. Whilst admitting that 2 years out of the last 4-year term have been unusual in its demands on the administration, I want to thank officers who have continued to work under different and very difficult conditions. So thank you very much. It still needs to be emphasised, however, that politically this administration has caused its own problems and failed residents to a degree that I would never have imagined possible. Its lack of care, determination to pursue its own agenda and general incompetence has left our borough in a worse state than in 2018, when you still surfed the wave of our financial prudence. Labour lets us down. Let's start first with housing. The council has a moral and statutory duty to provide social housing which is fit for use. In this, the Labour administration has failed some of our poorest and most needy residents. The publication of the Ombudsman's report late last year confirmed our repeatedly raised concerns that our housing stock was ridden with damp and mould. The report highlights the abysmal situation. The highest rate of mismanagement in damp and mold cases in England and the highest rate of maladministration for complaint handling in England. This appalling situation is yours and your responsibility alone. 8 years of deteriorating service to our tenants is unforgivable. Such an uncaring council, which has led LBHF to be named and shamed as the worst performing borough in England for housing repairs. It is a disgrace. This administration has obviously apologised, but that does not help residents living with these dreadful conditions. The toll on tenants' health, both physical and mental, especially during the pandemic when we were all forced to stay at home more, is a hidden shame the administration is trying to conceal from the general public. How could you let the repair service fail to this extent? Why don't you care? And I know that you don't really care, as you are not doing the repairs in an acceptable time frame, and rents are still going up this year by 1.5% on homes unfit for living in. A council home tenant in tears said to me, "I've given up complaining because nothing happens. We are all sleeping in one room now, and my children have breathing problems. I'm exhausted with the stress of cleaning when the damp and mold keeps coming back." How truly shocking and unacceptable in 2022. It is totally wrong that you spend your time trying to impose unwanted schemes on residents whilst failing to look after those that really need and rightly expect your help. This becomes even more clear when we look at the data from DCLG on affordable housing, which includes social and intermediate rent and low-cost ownership. Our borough came second lowest out of the London boroughs in 2020-21, with a miserly 19 units built. Now, you may well argue that 1 year's figures may be misleading. So if we look at the last 3 years, for example, LBHF have delivered 311 units out of a total delivered in London of 30,689. So only 1.01% of the total that other London boroughs have managed. Your record between 2014 and 2018 was even worse at 378, or 0.99% of the 38,062 homes completed in London. If that is not shaming in itself, between 2010 and 2014, we prioritised new affordable homes and built 519 new ones, which is 37% more than new in 2014 to 18, and 67% more than new between 2018 and 21. It is quite possible that your policy of pushing developers so hard, as you've continually boasted, to squeeze every penny of Section 106 and SIL payments out of them, means that they have just left this borough and taken their affordable homes elsewhere in London. Think about that. There used to be a great innovative regeneration department in 2013-14, but sadly for residents, your election caused developers to leave overnight, lessening income and payments for infrastructure and meaning our families cannot afford to live in our wonderful borough. There is so much more to say on this, but I'm now going to move on to crime and antisocial behaviour. The administration's attitude to crime and antisocial behaviour in the borough begs a number of serious questions as to their understanding of what residents want. All too often, and this is a recurring theme in your policies, you don't consult with residents. You dream up a scheme which suits your own vision and then deceive yourself into thinking it's what residents want. This delusional thought process can be illustrated in the abolition of the Parks Police. The Parks Police formed a highly respected team who knew our borough's parks, engaged with residents, and had powers of arrest. You ran down their numbers from 25 to 12.5 equivalent, pulled out of Borough and claimed they were not doing a good enough job. You then gathered together street scene enforcement officers, market inspectors, neighbourhood wardens from the estates, and the few remaining parks police who felt they had to stay on, and claim you've created a new team. You were unable or disinclined to recruit locally, so the new team has effectively very little knowledge of local issues. The audacity in announcing this odd combination of experience as a new enforcement team is truly a sleight of hand. They are armed with a book of fixed penalty notices, but no batons and very limited powers. So it's not surprising that residents have been underwhelmed by their appearance in the borough. You've trumpeted that you've invested, i.e. spent, £4.6 million in the new team. How this has been spent is debatable, as the total one-off setup costs for the new LET team came to £447,000, including £119,000 redundancy costs for the Parks Police. Perhaps the rest has been frittered away on their brand new hybrid vehicles now gracing our streets. The 4.6 million was garnered in Section 106 and SIL payments. So luckily you've not completely stopped development in LBHF, although you've had a pretty good go at that too. Sometimes killing the golden goose is not a good idea, as this applies to your well-publicised method of funding free social care as well. Notable crime is up by 6% on a rolling 12-month average, but by 13.8% most recently as COVID restrictions are lifted. The formation of a gangs violence and exploitation unit, although welcomed in September 2020, has unfortunately not yet had any immediate effect on the appalling number of stabbings in LBHF, where there was an increase in December of 5.13%. Violence against the person, excluding domestic violence, has also increased by 10.08%, and over the last 12 months by 9.88%. Drug dealing offences have also rocketed in our town centres, up by 12.37%. Not surprising when your Labour mayor is going soft on drugs. Will it be our borough next? It is shocking to have to say that our borough is in the top quartile in London for all crime at 111.6 crimes per 1,000 population. Our town centres, which you must remember are residential areas, are suffering from a huge increase in antisocial behaviour, drunkenness, people being sick, urinating, and worse on people's doorsteps. You are waffling over whether to support the renewal of the cumulative impact policy, which is a much needed tool for licensing to create a pleasant neighbourhood in Shepherd's Bush and Fulham Broadway. You are not supporting residents and businesses are suffering from an increase in shoplifting. You need to support them with actually watching the CCTV. Are there still only 8 officers watching CCTV? I thought you'd promised to increase the number of officers, or perhaps it was only non-watched cameras. It's so much against the grain for you to actually support the police that you try to remove their ward panels and the SNB and replace them with your own chums. This actually was against the law, but that wasn't going to stop you until residents and the police rose up and you had to back down. It's put residents off believing that you would know what to do or what is the right thing, a dreadful legacy. It's also highly shocking to us residents that you've reduced our funded extra real police from the 44 during our administration on the buy one, get one free scheme to only 6 at present. So another sleight of hand. Your new task force is new only in name and is less qualified than the policing we had under our administration and that our borough really needs. Again, your priorities are all wrong and us, the residents, who bear the brunt. Let down by Labour is the new refrain. I'll move on to Hammersmith Bridge, traffic, bus lanes and parking. LBHF is a beautiful residential borough defined by the Thames at its southern and western border. Fantastic though that is, it would be helpful if we could cross it once in a while, but no, this administration wants to stop us leaving and friends and relatives from visiting. 6 miles of uncrossable water. Hammersmith Bridge, owned, as the name implies, by the council, has been shut to motorised traffic for nearly 3 years. 3 years. It is such an unbelievably long time, particularly when you in administration have just prevaricated and ignored the knock-on effects of solid traffic in Fulham and increased air pollution as something of no consequence to you. Good functioning infrastructure is essential to a better borough, and you have failed residents in so many respects. It's extraordinary that you have been so slow to work with the government and TfL, to such an extent that the government had to appoint a task force to manage your situation. Even then, you failed to cooperate, refusing to supply engineering reports for which we, as residents, have paid, and refusing to share information with the opposition. The Denton report is one I could mention, along with the top secret structural engineering reports of 2014-15. I understand that this is probably because you're ashamed of your lack of capability, but if a hand is proffered and you are falling off a cliff, then any rational person would grasp it, and you didn't. You have been in denial, and the now infamous quote from the 2nd of September 2016 is worth repeating, as it illustrates your head in the sand attitude, and I quote, "It remains the case that there are no issues concerning the structural integrity of Hammersmith Bridge under its current weight restriction. The council and TfL will continue with preparatory work at the bridge ahead of a major scheme of improvements due to start in late 2017. These repairs, very regrettably, never started, and residents are still suffering the ongoing consequences. The funding of the repairs, with the government paying a third and then giving TfL another third, leaves you with the remaining third to fund. Sadiq Khan dissolved the London Bridges Fund in 2016 and presumably spent the money on his own pet projects. If that money had been available, as it should have been, it would have helped the financial situation. So a combination of 2 Labour entities has caused delays to thousands, appalling pollution on the Fulham Palace Road, Fulham Road, the New Kings Road and Hurlingham Road, and loss of income to businesses on both sides of the river. The council needs to recognise sooner rather than later, I wish, that it has to fund some of the repair costs. Every other borough in the country contributes to the maintenance of their own bridges. Why should people from Birmingham and Manchester pay? Our contribution should be a fair and reasonable sum of a realistic figure, and not of the inflated imaginary figures that you have been floating around. A good example of this is the estimate you floated for the stabilisation works, which are due to start at last in March. Apparently, your highly developed negotiating skills have saved us £21 million. Is it possible, I wonder, that you actually had no idea how much the works would cost, and plucking a figure from thin air, now claim to be saving residents money on works that actually would only ever have cost £8.9 million? Or perhaps you were trying to mislead TfL and the government to secure greater central funding. That is no way to work constructively with important stakeholders and partners, but that sadly is par for the course with Labour LBHF. I can't help but be sceptical as to the timing of your announcement in this election year, as the business case for what you're doing is not 100%. In addition, after nearly 3 years, you were no closer to organising a deal regarding the strengthening works necessary to reopen the bridge to our emergency services, buses and cars. You have profile spend in 2021 of £3.1 million and £5.6 million in 2022-23. Is this your realistic view of the costs to get the bridge opened as you promised within 6 years in all its resplendent glory? 3 years have gone by and the clock is ticking, or should I say, the bell is tolling. A shameful and embarrassing legacy which shows again we are let down by Labour. Moving on from the bridge, you have also failed to progress any plans or structural surveys for the Hammersmith fly-under, which would have mitigated much of the traffic we are now combating. Where is your vision for our borough? No plans have progressed for the Diamond Jubilee Bridge either, a bridge which would have improved connectivity in Sands End. Meanwhile, when we were in administration, we secured the new station at Imperial Wharf, fought for significant improvements on the West London line, and secured an HS2 interchange at Old Oak. You have not fought for the tube stations to have lifts and are seemingly content that disabled people and parents with buggies are not able to travel easily. All this is shocking enough, but when added to your apparent hatred of cars, travel in our borough becomes an increasing nightmare. Cycling is great and I enjoy it, but it's not an option open to all. In fact, it is very exclusive, and yet the new cycle lane in King Street is slowing vehicles to an almost daily grinding halt. Traffic backs up to Hammersmith Road, the Hammersmith Roundabout, the A4 Slip Road and the Fulham House Road. You have failed to get the TfL grant of 20,000 for CS9, so it's our bill and we cannot move. You have not argued your case with Mayor Khan and had more Santander bike stations installed north of Hammersmith and west of Westfield. Another shocking study shows that the fact that Hammersmith Roundabout is the most dangerous in the UK, with 287 crashes. Why not concentrate on making this safe? I feel I really need to explain very simply because your administration just does not seem to get it. Buses carry lots of people. Cars are necessary for the elderly, those with mobility issues, those with young children and/or heavy shopping. Ambulances and fire engines need room to manoeuvre in traffic. Deliveries need to be made, and workmen with tools need their vans. Residents are sufficiently informed and responsible not to undertake random journeys. You are insulting our residents by your policies. Our roads are only as wide as they are, and moving traffic is environmentally healthier than gridlock. So why this obsession? And it is an obsession with slowing our traffic to a snail's pace. It makes you wasting a year's pothole repair budget on painting 20-mile-an-hour signs on all our roads, which, by the way, are nearly all worn off, a rather futile gesture when 20 miles an hour is an aspirational speed in the borough. Do encourage cycling, and there are many ways to do this for those that can, but don't make our borough a no-car or bus zone. This leads me on to yet more muddled policies, the traffic congestion and pollution reduction scheme in Sands End East. You have already had to apologise for causing this chaos by altering the flow of traffic through Harwood Terrace against the results of the consultation. At least in this case, you did do a consultation of the 78 residents, but you then did the opposite of what they said. Then, when you realised that you had caused extra traffic chaos in Sands End East, instead of just reversing your previous undemocratic decision, you charged ahead, and without any statutory consultation and during a pandemic, you thought you'd put cameras up and earn more revenue from fines. The fact that you had to reimburse 80% of those issued initially seemed beside the point. This scheme has made the Wandsworth Bridge Road a residential road of 958 people and almost solid traffic jam. Endless pictures abound on Nextdoor of the daily and nightly gridlock. The pollution from idling traffic is sky high. You are now proposing to repeat your mistakes again, this time with the western extension to the TCPR. We support residents' concerns about rat running through residential streets and their understandable desire for a solution. But without proper consultation across Fulham, you are doomed to repeat the same mistake again, but this time with the New Kings Road, Fulham Road, Munster Road and Fulham High Street. Interestingly, the parking revenue breakdown shows a steady increase over the years, topping out at £38,892,131 in 2019-20, and this includes fines. I shouldn't have to tell you this, but I will, as I love this borough, and I've lived here for over 30 years, and I want it to be the very best borough for all residents. When you are in administration, your job is to act on behalf of all residents, make decisions and implement them. You have clearly failed on the first point, to act on behalf of all residents. In order to do this, you need to consult everyone, and not just in one area, but strategically over a far wider area, as changes have effects, and your job is to foresee them. Two of your cabinet have thrown in the towel on this mismanagement, and residents on both sides of the argument are in despair. So much so that some residents on both sides have felt it necessary to undertake your job for you. We would have managed matters carefully if in administration, with a full consultation of South Fulham, properly funded traffic studies as to the effect of any proposed changes over the wider area, and considered those who lack the access to technology that makes such a scheme viable. Only then, if there had been a clear mandate, would changes have been made. I can only say again that you are meant to act efficiently and with proper planning in order to do what residents want. And yet such is the confusion and anger when people have not been properly consulted that you have caused great anguish to South Fulham residents on both sides of the discussion. Was that your intention? You obviously did not have the vision to foresee that changing traffic flow to the east of Wandsworth Bridge Road would necessarily impact the western side. It beggars belief that you didn't care enough to think. Another pointer, when in administration, you need to think. Changing any access to roads is, and I quote, a courageous step, an adjective which Sir Humphrey Appleby declared in Yes Minister was worse than the adjective controversial, as the latter meant it wouldn't be accepted, while the former means you will lose the election. I now move on to yet another attack on the motorist and our much loved independent local shops. The extraordinary increase in parking charges for residents outside our small zones, or for anyone daring to come in, if they can get into the borough, to shop. Parking charges that rival the West End, £5 to £6 an hour, up from £2.20 or £2.80. This is a truly shocking policy. Residents are flabbergasted. What on earth made you think that this was acceptable? Was it because you needed the additional income for your other traffic schemes? Local shops are in despair, having suffered from the pandemic closures, and now this doubling and more of parking charges for their customers is wrong. Our zones are small, so the vast majority of our residents who drive are affected by these toe-curling increases. It makes one wonder, why do you favour the large supermarkets with their own free car parks over our small independent shops? Our high streets are highly valued by residents. It is one of the most popular features in our borough to have the variety of choice which they offer. Well, as an administration, you should be supporting our shops and restaurants, and you clearly are not. A local shopkeeper said to me, I can't understand why the council are doing this. It's a fine balance for business as it is, and our customers complain every time they come in, and it's the wrong atmosphere when we need them to shop. It's all very well keeping the visitor permit lower at £1.80, and thank you for that. But most residents have more than one car owning family coming to visit, and only one is allowed to park at the reduced rate. Draconian springs to mind. Residents, however, can be cheerful at this point, as we will cancel the parking charge increase if elected on May the 5th. We will now I'll now turn my attention to parks, air quality, weeds, tree planting, graffiti, fly tipping and recycling. Our borough is blessed by the forethought of our predecessors who funded and created so many parks. These green spaces make our borough one of the most sought after areas in London in which to live. But yet again, parks don't make it high up on your agenda. The report from the Parks Commission made 22 recommendations concerning how our green spaces should be improved. It should be noted that the council uses our parks in a highly commercial manner, gaining an income of about £1.5 to £2 million a year. This income, however, is hidden, and the Commission rightly called for more transparency so that residents know how our parks are funded, whether it is through the increase of fees and charges to residents and schools, Section 106 and CIL payments, or council tax. The Commission also expressed its concern that some parks do not always receive their, and I quote, fair share of available funds, and that some money intended for parks via Section 106 payments is never spent on parks. It is not acceptable that Section 106 and CIL payments have not been published since 2017 when you promised to do so. I find it ironic in the extreme that you are now charging borough dog walkers £175 a year and non-borough dog walkers £300, as well as advertised plans to charge a personal trainer. I remember your budget response speech in 2014, where you spent ages describing as ridiculous the possibility of charging for a personal trainer, and your favourite words were stealth taxes. You posed an amusing then and touching, in retrospect, vignette of you and the late Councillor Cartwright exercising together in the park and not knowing which one of you was the personal trainer. We never charged a fee for training, and you took the credit for that then, and now you are charging. How times have changed. The crucial point, I believe, regarding the parks is the lack of money spent on maintenance. This makes our green spaces look unkempt and uncared for, and leads to low-level antisocial behaviour like careless littering, minor damage to infrastructure, and so on. It is rather as though the administration rarely uses our green spaces, as this would be top of your agenda if you actually cared. One further point on our parks, which I have to highlight, was your knee-jerk response when lockdown was first announced. You closed the parks for a week, the only borough to do so strictly against government directions. You obviously panicked just when residents needed the parks most, a really poor reflection on your management and leadership. Air quality in our borough is not adequately measured and has become worse due to the increase in stationary traffic, as I've mentioned earlier in my speech. Surely you realise the effect on residents' health and the increasing demand from residents that proper measurements are taken and that the flow of traffic is not impeded. Walking needs to be encouraged as well as cycling, as walking is possibly far more possible for a wider number of residents as exercise and well-being. Mentioning walking brings me to the condition of our pavements. Surely you have realised by now that operatives armed with a hoe bashing at weed flower heads is not an effective method of stopping growth. In fact, far from stopping growth, it encourages further growth. The exasperation of residents is almost audible. Why does our borough look such a mess? It ought to be a fair warning to you all. Planting additional street trees is vital, but trees must be watered, especially in their first few years, otherwise they die. There are a few more dog poo bins, which is great, but they are not emptied enough, and an overflowing dog poo bin with associated smell is enough to put you off your daily exercise. Graffiti seems to be everywhere, or perhaps it's just not removed properly, like on Putney Bridge in Bishop's Park. Faded but still visible graffiti just adds to the conception that the borough is run down and shoddy. This is true about the increase in fly tipping as well. So many street corners with discarded white goods, assorted bags, pieces of wood and broken furniture. This is obviously all domestic rubbish. Perhaps suspending temporarily the bulky waste collections was not such a good idea. Perhaps charging less might increase take-up. It certainly costs us as a borough when you have to collect it after it's been reported by a member of the public. I must move on to your experimental recycling scheme. Given that we are the second worst borough in London for recycling, something needed to be done. But why are other boroughs doing better? This is the question you should be thinking about. Your experimental scheme, of which the final decision has been constantly pushed back to beyond the election, has been poorly implemented. Not thorough enough consultation, again, is the answer. For all these schemes, you have to bring residents with you and not impose your views. Bins so tall that they overpower the low front room windowsills, not returning bins to the front gardens, all of these issues are grating to residents who pay through their council tax for a service. Many still hope for an efficient service, but can they seriously have confidence that you can provide one? Allowing and not dealing with these smaller matters leads exponentially to a feeling that the council doesn't care. Not a good look for you in election year when we are let down by Labour. This leads me neatly onto your freezing of council tax. Oh yes, it is election year. Whilst any compulsory tax, whilst any less compulsory tax is welcomed, I don't think you can hide from residents that you've increased council tax since the last election year freeze of 2018-19. So up 4.70% in 1920, up 3.99% in 2021, and up 4.99% last year. What on earth, if you were to win the election, would it go up next year and the year after that? Thank goodness you are going to retain our council tax support scheme. It would have been shameful if you hadn't. In a motion which you wrote but didn't allow us to debate in January, you claimed you wanted more funding from the government, and yet you have, as is legally required, miraculously produced a balanced budget whilst freezing council tax in election year. Sadly, more discombobulated thinking. Regretfully for residents, Mayor Khan has hiked his precept by 8%. What a slap in the face to us Londoners. Yeah. Tonight, we have a weak budget before us built around synthetic ideals. I teach English to people who have English as a second language and have heard many fairy tales over the years. Unfortunately, the administration's budget proposals this evening are not of the Hans Christian Andersen genre, but more like Brothers Grimm. I believe it is clear that you have not accomplished your much heralded value statements. There has been no building of a shared prosperity for council tenants in damp and mould-ridden homes, no support for the general electorate outside election year regarding council tax, very little building of affordable homes for our residents' children, and/or very little progress in developing and maintaining our infrastructure. The list goes on. As to creating a compassionate council, many residents who've had to deal with your policies would strongly disagree. Many seemingly minor concerns to you, but important to residents, are ignored, as our email boxes illustrate. So many residents have wanted to ask questions at ordinary council meetings and have been told time has run out. You are in charge of time in this context. We always extended question time because we wanted to listen to residents' concerns. You are obviously too grand or paranoid at the thought that residents may have contrary views to actually listen to them. Again, it's clearly hard for you to be compassionate to others when internally there has been bullying and discrimination at the highest level. There is a difference between strength and tyranny, and I think the majority of voters would concur. As to being ruthlessly financially efficient, this would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. On the one hand, you spend your energy claiming lack of funds, which is all, of course, the government's fault, but have no hesitation in claiming you've made £122 million worth of cuts and that you can still make more cuts. How is it that you've not made these further cuts already? Why have you wasted taxpayers' money for 8 years? Why have you spent 7-figure sums on employing Labour Party members, former councillors and retired MPs, often against the advice of officers? Pulling out of Borough was an ideological move, which has obviously cost our borough both financially and practically for the most vulnerable that use our services. The borough's finances may be in a slightly better position this year than last, but that is thanks to the Conservative government and not to this Labour administration. Time and again, it's been shown that Conservative councils run finances more efficiently, and this last term has shown that you flounder. And lastly, you want us to believe that you take pride in our borough. How can this be, we all think? The following are your responsibilities, and the national economy is not, thank God. A necessarily shortened list, but here goes. The weeds multiplying on our pavements, the copious fly tipping, irksome graffiti, shoddy maintenance to fences and railings in our parks, a bridge that you can't drive across, dirty chewing gum strewn on our pavements, tattered and years out of date signs and notices, huge torn banners advertising propaganda, broken branches dangling off street trees, overflowing waste bins, traffic chaos, dismembered, abandoned bikes, and wonky streetlights. We are let down by Labour. To conclude, I would like to thank residents for their tireless work on local improvement schemes across our borough and the contribution that it makes to our daily lives. I only wish that they had a council which would actually support their immense voluntary endeavours better. Our borough deserves the best, and we have candidates standing in the election who really love this borough. Candidates who will work to make this borough fairer, safer, greener and cleaner for all residents and bring back pride to Hammersmith and Fulham. We look forward to the election on May the 5th.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. I have 3 speakers from the administration and 3 from the opposition. So I'll first call on Councillor Andrew Jones, and each of the speakers have 5 minutes each.
Stand up. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for being able to speak. I actually speak, as you might expect, Councillor Schmidt speak as the Cabinet Member for Finance, and I would start by saying I speak in his stead as he's unable to be here in person. I was going to start by reflecting, as others have, on having heard many budget speeches, and of course I have 5 minutes, so I don't have too long. And what I wanted to do after listening to the Leader of the Opposition in particular, I mean, there was a great deal of rhetoric and a considerable amount of assertion in what's just been said. But as Councillor Schmidt has I'm sure would say were he in the room, it was rather thin on facts, a selective list of some things that I quite understand the opposition wish were the case, and a range of things, some valid points on specific issues, and a range of things that are very detailed, but don't reflect the overall situation of what we're talking about tonight, which is this budget. And I do feel I've been here before, because maybe for many years I've heard similar speeches and I understand what before and we're at that point. What I know Councillor Schmidt would do if in this room is try to draw out the big picture on this budget. And I reflect on being in a finance pack, I think with the mayor a few years ago, where one of the independent members who worked in the city, I think, was very financially able, sort of listened for about an hour and a half to the budget and said, and I didn't know the individual concerned very well at all, I was attending the pack, said, and I'll pick this up because it applies to this, this is an excellent budget. It is a budget in local authorities that leads the country. And it's another one. Over the last 8 years, we've delivered successive budgets that are like this. And I want just to reflect on some of the cumulative impact of 8 years and pay tribute to Councillor Schmidt's work and those of the excellent finance officers and all of these initiatives, which have led us to be able to be in this situation after the largest cuts to local government finance since the Second World War. And you can see that around the country. You have local authorities, Conservative-led ones, being close to bankruptcy, in effect bankruptcy, and struggling to provide services. So I think we need to return to the big picture issues. So cumulatively, over the last year, 3 or 4 things. What have we saved? Where has there been growth? Where have we invested in services? And the numbers are big. And where is our council tax position? So the longer term overview, since 2014, in terms of procurement and commissioning, we have saved a recurrent £27 million every year from contracts, not very good contracts that we inherited in 2014. That weren't delivering. I can mention BT Managed Services, SEN Transport, Amy, Mighty, the list goes on. We now have 27 million of recurrent savings from procurement and commissioning. We've had a little specific comment about something we didn't like about commercialisation. This is very important in local government finance. We are £19 million a year better off because of our professional approach to getting rid of old-fashioned bureaucracy and generating commercial revenue. Something which has enabled us to continue to invest, and I'll come to that in a minute. So we've cut charges to residents in real terms, but also generated income of about 19 million from some degrees of commercialisation. We've also generated £15 million of efficiencies from staff productivity, which is making the organisation more efficient, removing senior management posts that we didn't need, and promoting our excellent staff from within. And we have reconfigured services, and we heard reference to the Triborough. We are £22 million a year better off because we are not in Triborough, because it was ill-conceived. It wasn't a very efficient form, and it didn't allow us to make the savings we needed. In terms of growth, we've invested £18.5 million each year in children's services in terms of generating the headroom to put these efficiencies in, and an extra £20 million in social care, including what we've already heard about, adult social care. So in summary, because I'm going to run out of time, I want to remind everybody here of the reality of the financial position. My London pointed out that we have had the second smallest increase in council tax in real terms of any London borough. We're one of the lowest council taxes in the country, while growing many, many services. Since 2014, the Band D council tax in Hammersmith and Fulham has increased 13.2% to 831. The RPI was 24.25% in that time. That is a real terms cut. Had it even just followed inflation, council tax in this borough would be £913 in Band D. So residents are much better off. I will sum up, draw to close. Residents are much better in terms of the amount of council tax they pay. We are a low tax borough and a high service borough, and we've generated that through efficiencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And I call on Councillor Adronny Alford to speak. Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I have grave concerns regarding the proposed HRA budget. I'm sure that all the councillors should be aware that this is a budget that is ring-fenced and must balance. It can't be in deficit and must always have a reserve to deal with any unexpected contingencies. Going through the EHA pack, it was clear that there is a serious problem with the HRA account. The council has to find savings of over 3 million in order to make sure that there is sufficient funds to cover contingencies in the HRA. However, the Labour administration is not able to say where these savings will come from. These savings seem to have to be found out of thin air. To find 3 million of unplanned and as yet unfounded savings is an impossible task. In addition, once the savings, if they're found, they have to be instigated in a very short time frame. It simply won't happen. It will take at least 6 months to find the savings and then another at least 6 months to put it in place. We're all living in very difficult times, in particular in what has happened today, and more claims will go on that account. It's important that we have to take care of our residents. They are the most important thing for us. And in these difficult times, there will be considerable pressures on this account, but the council must be prudent. It is clear that to repair the deplorable state of the council properties will place yet another strain on the budget and the reserves. If the Labour administration had not let the properties get in such a deplorable state, this cost would not be occurring. I fear it's a false and unwise plan to only raise the rents by a bare minimum. I have no wish to add extra expenses to our hard-pressed residents, but the decision to increase the rents by only 1.5% will again add further strain. I know it's an election year and nobody wants to be unpopular, especially this administration. But I am concerned that this decision will result in next year having to put far, far higher rent increases, which will hit our residents harder with everything else that's happening. So I would regret that it is the decision that they've made. Indeed, no explanation has been given as to whether there will or why there won't have to be a major increase next year. The council makes great play of doing things with residents, not to them. But as my leader has said, the number of complaints we're receiving regarding the lack of repairs, the failure for people to turn up, and today I was in Plaintree Court, no hot water. They've been months on and off without hot water. I believe one of the residents told me there were 3 boilers installed. Surely you can make a boiler work. The failure to address these problems with repairs places further pressure. It's all very well to say that there's a strategy in place, but it's not working. Again, another glaring problem is the failure to complete voids on time. I've had a resident who's been waiting for 6-8 months. She was told to pack up her flat before Christmas. This is a young woman with a young child. She's still in boxes. They haven't finished the void. I have to say, and I regret this, that in the HRA budget report, there are far too many nebulous and uncosted proposed savings. There are very real pressures and no solutions. And it's not good enough, and it's detrimental to the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham. I would urge the Labour administration to address the problems in the HRA account urgently.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Heller Rowbottom. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Across Britain, costs are going up. The Conservatives are putting tax up through their regressive rise in national insurance, and council taxes are also going up almost everywhere. They're going up in Conservative Westminster, they're going up in Conservative Kensington and Chelsea, but here in Labour Hammersmith and Fulham, council tax will be frozen. Here, we have rejected the government-modelled 3% raise to the tax and social care precept and instead stepped in to do our bit to confront the Conservative cost of living crisis. Mr. Mayor, this budget seals it. Labour in Hammersmith and Fulham have the best record on council tax in London over the last 8 years. We will have the 3rd lowest council tax in the country next year. Our council tax will be 9% lower in real terms when we end our 2nd term in office than when we started our 1st. And it's not just a low council tax, it's a lean council budget, delivering more for less with high value and innovative services, including over 7 million of additional investment. Labour have done this because we know that COVID and inflation rates have ravaged residents' personal finances. And to do this, we've had to make genuine efficiencies. We've then put these efficiencies back into frontline services, a law enforcement team to crack down on crime, free breakfast for school children, and free adult social care. We've got an ambitious agenda on climate change, a revitalising civic life, have created an industrial strategy, and are modernising and reforming the council to make change from the inside out. Local Tories used to brag about their record on low council tax, but this was only done when they had the helping hand of a Labour government giving a generous amount to public services. And then, from 2011, they were propped up by the government money from Eric Pickles's council tax freeze grant, where they were actually paid to cut or freeze council tax. These ended after 2015, and so Labour in Hammersmith and Fulham have delivered the best council tax record of the last 8 years completely off our own backs through our determination to make the council better. In 2010, under the Conservatives, the budget was just shy of 182 million. Under Labour, it's now 125 million. Since we came into office, we have removed £57 million of net spend. We've even come in under budget for the past 2 years, continuing a track record of shrewd financial management. And we've done all this despite over a decade of Tory austerity, a 54% cut to local government finances in real terms, a global pandemic, and huge growing levels of need. The Conservatives were kicked out of office in 2014 under the clouds of their deals to condemn Charing Cross Hospital, the West Kensington and Gibbs Green Estates and Sullivan Schools. We stepped in not only to put these wrongs right, but with a forward-looking mission of ambitious reform. Labour in Hammersmith and Fulham have combined the best of social democracy, delivering a compassionate public service agenda, leaving no one behind, while doing what the right claim to be best at, keeping taxes and costs low. So heading into the local elections in May, the question is, on what platform are the Tories running for public office here in Hammersmith and Fulham? What is their offer to the public? Why would residents vote for them? Back in 2010, when all of the brutal Tory cuts landed under the guise of a big society, I was working in a social enterprise in the borough supporting older people. I saw firsthand the dismantling of a robustly funded welfare state replaced by ruthless austerity. It hit vulnerable older residents who lived on their own, who didn't have family nearby, who didn't realise that their hard-earned pension wouldn't cover their care, and who struggled to cope while support was being rapidly withdrawn. I remember how degrading and frankly cruel the cuts were for people in this borough who deserved so much better. I was struck by something that Councillor Coleman revealed in a recent meeting, that since Labour cut home care charges in the borough, there's been a 40% rise in uptake, and that's despite much tighter eligibility criteria. It just goes to show how much unmet need was hidden here during Tory rule. So much silent suffering happening behind closed doors. I'm proud, and I know that my colleagues here are proud, to stand again and to represent a council that has managed to weather a hostile financial climate while being uncompromising and upholding our values and promises to the residents who elected us. We would therefore like to put forward and recommend this balanced budget and council tax freeze for next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you. The last two speeches have finished within the 5 minutes. Councillor Brown, over to you. Yes, anybody else from the Tory, sorry, from the Conservative benches would like to speak? We only have 3 from each side. Any other Conservatives? Like to speak? I understand Councillor Loveday has gone home and he's not well. So, and please send our commiserations to him. Okay, thank you very much. Then I'll move on to, Councillor Ree.
I'm happy to defer until after Councillor Brown.
The Conservative councillors will speak last. So just because it's one after the other. So, yeah.
Okay, I'll go for it. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start by congratulating the officers and councillors who've put this budget together. It's a budget that's both progressive and prudent, investing in services for our most vulnerable residents, boosting reserves and contingency funds to prepare for a rainy day, and freezing council tax and charges to the residents whose finances have been so stretched over the last few years. But if I could turn to some of the speeches we've heard from the other side this evening. I'm disappointed that the opposition won't be supporting the budget this evening, but I can't say I'm surprised. Listening to what the leader of the opposition said, it's clear that not only do they not have any of the answers to the issues facing residents, they don't even understand the problems. This budget addresses the real issues facing residents. We are going through a cost of living crisis with inflation and energy bills going through the roof, something that the leader of the opposition didn't think it was worth mentioning. On council rents, Councillor Alford says that the rent should go up, whereas the leader of the opposition says they should go down. But it's no wonder the opposition won't agree with our proposals. They can't even agree amongst themselves. But we are addressing the cost of living. This council has funded a council tax support scheme to reduce the burden on those least able to pay. It's frozen charges in adult social care, in children's services and in housing, as well as abolishing care home costs completely. And it has frozen council tax, a real terms cut, as Councillor Cowan mentioned, a regressive charge that hits those on the lowest incomes hardest. This is a better record of the last 8 years than any Tory-run council in London, by the way. And Mr. Mayor, I remember when the Conservative Party used to claim to be the party of low taxes. Now we have a Tory government that's putting up national insurance for working people and giving councils a funding settlement that assumes a 3% increase in local taxes. And here in Hammersmith and Fulham, it sounds like the Tories want to put taxes up as well. Just last year, local Conservatives were calling on the council to spend £50 million on Hammersmith Bridge. And the leader of the opposition has said that we should spend a third on these repair costs tonight. This is a sum that could only come from an eye-watering tax increase on local residents. It's not budgeting, it's not even basic arithmetic. Hammersmith and Fulham cannot afford the cost of more Tory government, and they'll be pleased to, and the residents will be pleased to see the difference that Labour are making locally. Now, the leader of the opposition should be praising this council's measures to cut crime, not opposing them. We've funded 72 law enforcement officers to patrol our streets, a new gangs unit, an extensive CCTV network, and made huge new investments in this budget to prevent violence against women and girls. Now, Mr. Mayor, I remember when the Conservative Party used to claim to be the party of law and order. Now we've got a Tory government that admits breaking international law in limited and specific ways, and the shame of a Prime Minister being questioned by the police under caution for breaking his own lockdown rules. Residents can see that they have a Labour Party committed to fighting crime, while the Conservative Party just commit crime. The leader of the opposition didn't even mention climate change, the biggest issue facing not just our borough, but our country and our planet. Recent storms should be a warning of the dangers to come from climate change and the impact it will have on our way of life. Mr. Mayor, I even remember a time when the Conservative Party claimed to care about the climate. Do you remember David Cameron going to the Antarctic to hug a husky for a photo op before coming home to complain about the green crap in our energy bills? This council recognises that we have an obligation to do our bits to save the planet, and I am proud of our record on the environment. The best climate emergency plan in London, the highest concentration of electric vehicle charging points in Britain, and the highest concentration of air quality monitors in Europe. And this budget goes further, investing in everything from bike hangers to flood mitigation. Sadly, the opposition have no answers to the problems facing local residents. They're a party out of touch, out of ideas, and thankfully for the foreseeable future, out of office. This budget addresses the issues that matter to residents. It invests in the services that residents need, while easing the financial burden faced by those who can least afford to pay it. It shows residents that there is a Labour council that is on their side, and I'd urge everyone here to support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can I first congratulate the leader of the Conservative Group on an excellent, excoriating speech highlighting the failures of the Labour administration here in Hammersmith and Fulham. You know, I know from my 3 years as leader of the opposition how difficult it is to give a budget speech. And I also remember fondly the Councillor Cowan's speech in 2014, which was one to remember. But I'm going to put the party politics to one side now, as this is my farewell speech as a councillor in Hammersmith and Fulham, which has been one of the great privileges of my life to serve our local community and borough. And I very much want to thank, firstly, my wife and children for the support that they've given me over that time, but also, most importantly, the residents who have elected me, firstly, as a town ward councillor, but also my colleagues in the Conservative group, both present and past, and especially those in town ward. As we've discussed at quite sad occasions over the last few years in this chamber, when councillors have been taken too soon, both serving councillors and those who've stood down. It is an immense privilege and honour to be able to serve your local community. And as Councillor Loveday spoke so eloquently about the situation in Ukraine, it's a privilege that not all people have across the world, to be able to be represented by people that they elect. And I think despite all the hoo-ha of adversarial politics, it's something that we should respect and cherish, especially when we can see how vulnerable it can sometimes be. You know, there's lots that you know, local authorities do to improve the lives of their residents. And, you know, I have no doubt that over the last 8 years, there have been many improvements under this Labour administration, as there were under the last Conservative administration for the 8 years preceding that. But I do want to, leave with a parting advice to the administration if they are lucky enough to be re-elected in May, which I very much hope they're not. And I very much hope that this was Councillor Brocklebank-Fowler's last speech as leader of the opposition, and next year she'll be making the speech as leader of the council. You know, there's a lot that can be done in local politics when people work together. I know that's not always been very easy to do in Hammersmith and Fulham, but I hope that both parties come the next election learn to make a difference and do democracy in how we want it to be done, and not necessarily how it has been done in the past. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the indulgence you've given me, and thank you all again to my colleagues, to my family, to all the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham who've done so much and do so much outside of this chamber to make our borough a fantastic place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Cowan, to sum up, and you have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. Well, look, it's been interesting debate, and I would wish the former leader of the opposition and current deputy leader of the opposition all the best in his whatever he does next. And thank him for his service over the time he served. It was interesting listening to the leader of the opposition speech because it's become evident to me that she can only give pre-prepared speeches, as she was incapable of responding to any of the facts that was in the papers or indeed in the in my comments. So we'll be very clear. Since this Labour administration arrived in office in 2014, the residents of this borough have had a 9% real terms cut. We have cut and frozen council tax on many occasions during our tenure, which is why, just to be clear, it is 9% lower than it was when we came into office. And that is something all people, irrespective of their politics, should celebrate. And I'm not taking lessons from those people on consultation, because I was the leader of the opposition for 8 years and I lost count of a number of protests. But I remember the protests at selling off council homes. And where was the leader of opposition? Hanging out with Capco and supporting their House of Cards scheme, which any normal person would have recognized could never have got off the ground. Talk to anyone in the property industry, and that scheme was a joke. It was undeliverable, but not as far as these people were concerned, and they traumatized the residents of the West Kent and Gibbs Green estates. And shortly after we were elected, I met a developer who had bought the Rowers shops, which Patrick Toys are on the Clementley estate. And he told me he'd been meeting with the ward councillor. Who is that ward councillor, you might say? The leader of the opposition at the moment. And he told me she had agreed to have those shops demolished and rebuilt, and that the council would give them Fulham North. That was his pitch to me, and that they would have no genuinely affordable housing in the new developments, but just 11% that wasn't private luxury housing. So I'm not taking lessons on affordable housing from someone who was in office, who had power and never once lifted a finger. And in terms of consultation, who remembers the meeting after a woman was found beaten black and blue and sleeping in a park, and she went to the council to ask if she could be made homeless because she was terrified, and they turned her away. The charity that found her in that park, Threshold Housing, what was the reaction of this lot? To remove all funding from them and close the charity down because they were affronted, they were done for maladministration. Now, we apologise for all anything that's gone wrong on our council estates, and I mean that sincerely, as my colleague said last time. But we didn't inherit an easy package. We inherited mighty and a ridiculous 10-year contract, and we had a programme of getting rid of all the council estates, which these people signed up to, argued for, and never, ever apologised. Now, let's just talk.
That's not true.
Let's just talk about Hammersmith Bridge.
Councillor.
The very first words from the lips of the leader of the opposition should have been, I am sorry. I am sorry, she should have said, because she was responsible for the bridge. She was responsible for the bridge up until we got into office. £63,000 spent, £63,000 spent on the bridge and never ever checked. The best thing that happened here was that we won control of the council and they weren't done for negligence. So we're not taking lessons on Hammersmith Bridge, especially as they spent the last few years doing nothing other than trying to undermine us as we fix the bridge. It is nonsense that it was never going to be 163 or 140 million. And it's simply not good enough to come out with stuff that's factually untrue. This is a very important issue, and to trivialize it the way the leader of the opposition did is exactly what she did when she was in office. So this budget, more for children, more for adults, more for crime fighting, and less for residents, out of residents' pockets. That's what's in this budget, and I commend it to the council.
Okay, thank you, councillors. Thank you, councillors. I will now settle down. I will now move to the vote, as this is a vote on the budget. It requires that a roll call be taken. Now, usually what would happen in the old chamber, if you remember, would ring a division bell for a minute. Unfortunately, we don't have a division bell, but as we're all here and I can't imitate bells, Ms. Davies, can you please commence the roll call? Ding, ding. Thank you.
Will councillors please indicate how they wish to vote on the recommendation? It's item 6.1, the council budget. Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Coleman. Councillor Cowan. Councillor Fenimore. Councillor Harcourt. Councillor Harvey. Councillor Homan. Councillor Jones. Councillor Kwong. 4. Councillor Murphy.
Not voting.
Councillor Perez. Councillor Keam. Councillor Ree. Councillor Rowbottom. Councillor Umi Francis. 4. Councillor Umi Mercy. Councillor Vaughan. Councillor Vincent. Councillor Alford.
Against.
Councillor Brocklebank Fowler.
Against.
Councillor Brown. Councillor Donovan.
Against.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Carmel. Councillor Lloyd Harris. Councillor Stainton.
Against.
Councillor Stanton. Councillor Thorley.
Thank you. The votes are 17 for, 10 against, and 1 not voting. The motion and recommendations are carried. Thank you. We now move on to item 6.2, the 4-year capital programme 2022 to 26 and the capital strategy 22-23, and that's on page 105 of your agenda pack. I call upon the leader of the council, Stephen Cowan, to formally move the report.
Formally moved.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak on this item? Councillor Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did want to speak on this item because I think in light of the discussion we've had and the speech of the leader of the opposition, it's really important to revert to some of the important facts in this report. And I turn to page 108. There's been a lot of discussion and in the previous council meeting and political rhetoric around affordable housing and affordable housing completion. And I do think it's worth being very clear around the facts which reflect the inaccuracy or the misrepresentation of some of these statements. We've talked about building genuine affordable housing, and we've had reference to the delivery figures. There are, of course, famously many forms of affordable housing, and I think back to 2010 and talking about the delivery of the previous Conservative administration on affordable housing. When we took office in 2014, and the figure was referenced, I think, in 2014, about the numbers of delivered units, there is more to affordable housing than how many units DCLG count. Because from my perspective, and I will explain in a minute, the last Conservative administration delivered no affordable housing, no genuinely affordable housing. And as the person who came in with responsibility, what came through the planning system, and I can take on a walking tour around much of the borough of these developments, was what is known as discount market sale housing, which is in short the cheapest form for the developer and for the council of affordable housing, and entails essentially giving a 20% discount to the purchase price to a purchaser. Now, there is benefit in this. People who are probably reasonably affluent in the borough can afford to buy this housing more cheaply, and it does help people who are in need of housing. It certainly does not help anybody in the lower, and I spoke at this on many budget meetings, in the lower proportions of income in the borough. So those people who wish to rent or need to rent or on the average salary have no hope whatsoever ever affording to be able to buy this housing. Secondly, it's not generally received in the housing industry a good use of public money, because unless it's well covenanted, is the phrase, what happens is you basically give somebody a discount to buy a house, somebody who's reasonably affluent, and at a subsequent point they can sell it, and that's it. So we have focused, and we have since 2014, on genuinely affordable housing, much of it for rent, much of that below social rent or at social rent. Some of it's even cheaper than that for some of the people who are in most dire housing need, and we're delivering those units. And just to prick the bubble of unreality that is often discussed in here with evidence, if you turn to page 108 and look at the capital expenditure on the HRA capital programme across the years 2022 to 2026, you will see we are going to spend £389 million. Most of that is on genuinely affordable housing. That's the subsidy, the level of subsidy you need. Obviously, it's more expensive to provide housing for people on low incomes and to make that genuinely affordable. Now, that's a big number. Councillor Cowan referenced where that money has come from, and I think it provides some very weighty evidence around our commitment to providing genuinely affordable homes for the residents of this borough. Around £100 million being spent over the next 4 years each year, a bit less, 70 or 80 in some years. So I just think it's important, given the sort of misrepresented statements earlier, that in terms of this being the budget and what this administration would propose to do over the next 4 years, we're going to spend nearly £400 million on genuinely affordable housing. And that won't be something that is mythological or could be misrepresented by saying we haven't delivered that. This money is going to be spent on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speeches at all? No, no other speeches? Okay, I'll move to the report and its recommendations. Is the report and its recommendations agreed? I hear more agrees than not agrees. Did you go to a vote or can we just go to a vote? Okay. All those in favour of the report, would they please show? All those against? And all those non-voting? Alone again by myself. Thank you very much. It's 4-17 against 10, not voting 1. The recommendations and reports are carried. So we now move on to item 6.3, the Treasury Management Strategy Statement 2022-23, which is on page 142. I call upon the leader, Councillor Cowan, to move the report and recommendations.
Formally moved.
Does anybody wish to speak on the item? Okay, is the report and its recommendations agreed? No? Okay, we'll go to a vote. All those in favour, will they please show? Sorry, those against? So I wasn't quick enough on your counting. So those against, can you show up? You got? Yeah. Yeah, and non-voting. Sorry, you're not voting. My mistake. Okay, can you put your hands up again so we can count the not voting? Thank you. That's 4-17 against none, not voting 10. So I'm no longer Billy No Mates. And so the report and its recommendations are carried. We now move on to item 6.4, which is on page 185. It's the Pay Policy Statement 2022-23. I call upon the leader, Councillor Stephen Cowan, to move the report and recommendations.
Formally moved.
Does anybody wish to speak on this item? Councillor Carmel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't, you'll be pleased to know, give you my full usual speech on this subject. The basic facts are totally uncontestable. Despite the PR puff of a headline-grabbing 10% SRA reduction, anyone who actually looks at the published figures can see that the administration SRA total costs have increased since you regained
Councillor, I think you're speaking on the wrong item.
Oh, my apologies.
It just shows we're listening, Councillor. Do you want to wait till the next one?
Yes, my apologies.
Okay, fine, thank you much. Is there anybody else? Is there anybody else who'd like to speak or not speak? Yeah, I think I'm going to become ventriloquist. This was wonderful. Okay, all those in favour? Sorry, is the report and its recommendation agreed? Great. Thank you. We now move on to, I'm lost now, sorry. We now move on to item 6.5, the Members' Allowances Scheme, its annual report. It's on page 207. I call upon the Leader of the Council, Councillor Stephen Cowan, to move the report and recommendations.
Formally moved.
Does anybody wish to speak on this item? Are you sure? Thank you, Councillor. Please go ahead. And thank you for indulging my humour as well.
My apologies, Mr. Mayor. I saw the title of the thing on front of me. It said pay and it immediately said conflated with that. I shall skip to where I had got to last time round. And that is that anyone who actually looks at the published figures can see that the administration SRA total costs have increased since he regained the administration. You should be honest with the residents of this borough and admit that this is the truth. We will once again be voting against this report. You crow at item 7 of the report that the 50% recommendation from the independent panel is no longer in there. Rather, I suspect, Mr. Mayor, they got bored of being ignored. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speeches? Councillor Cong.
That one there, yeah. Okay. Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. It is traditional at this point of the proceedings, usually my colleague, Councillor Culhane, to say a few words. Unfortunately, he can't be with us this evening, so this duty falls upon me. And I think it's probably a useful moment for us all to reflect on the allowance that councillors get. And it's not just about the amount that they get paid. Obviously, we want to think about what they do for their allowance. Have they taken up constituents' problems? Have they done good things? Have they voted in full council to make residents' lives better? And of course, their opposition councillors, have they held the administration to account? And I hope that people listening tonight to what this administration has done will feel that the Labour councillors have earned their allowance, some best council tax record in London, adult social care free, standing on the front foot in the fight against COVID. But when it comes to the Conservative opposition members, what have they done to earn their allowances over the past year? And obviously, so I mean, Mr. Mayor, you'd agree with me that a scripted round once a year doesn't really count, does it, in terms of holding the administration to account? What you've got the opportunity to do if you're an opposition member is you've got the opportunity to go along to cabinet meetings, to challenge, to question, to probe, to express concerns. It's a huge thing to be, it's a huge thing that an opportunity you have the right to speak. Sadly, it's not a right and opportunity that opposition members really take up. I've had a bit of a look, and over the past 4 years since we were elected, the cabinet's met 39 times. How many of the meetings did the opposition attend to challenge, probe, clarify, express the concerns so lengthily expressed just now? 11. 70% of the time, there were no opposition members at the cabinet. So maybe it's difficult. Maybe they're not all two-car families. It's difficult for them to get to the cabinet meetings. However, it became easier because sadly, due to COVID, we started having meetings online. So they only had to go to their table, open up the computer and take part in a Zoom meeting. We met 19 times online. We've met 19 times since last May. They've missed 16 out of the 19 meetings, 84% absence record from cabinet. It's no good standing up once a year and saying you don't like things. If you want to try and improve things, democratically, take the opportunity given to you. So, Mr. Speaker, I have to say,
Cabinet is not the opportunity
Mr.
to do that.
Either that they are happy with what we're doing, and not a surprise given if you look at our record over the last 8 years, or they just can't be bothered. As I say, a rant once a year doesn't really justify the allowance you get as a councillor for the 12 months. But if I could just move to another thing, it's not just about turning up a cabinet, it's about positions that councillors take. And as I've said, Mr. Speaker, you've heard already a detailed explanation of what the administration's tried to do to improve residents' lives and improve the borough. The question has to be, what would the opposition have done? What would they have done to justify their allowances, to try and make people's lives better? We've had some idea from what they've said tonight, but the best way really is to look at how they voted at full council. And their record is extremely interesting and worth some scrutiny. I've been looking at their voting record over the past 4 years since the last election, since we were voted in and they weren't given the opportunity to serve here as the administration. Let me give you a flavour of what this residents would have had if the Conservatives had been running the borough. First thing, July 2018, they voted against this administration's guarantee never to cut bin collections. We said we never cut bin collections. They wouldn't support this. None of this is nonsense. It's all there in the record. I've gone through every single council document. 17th of October 2018, they refused to call on Matt Hancock, who was then the new Secretary of State, to end Shaping a Healthier Future and remove the threat to Charing Cross Hospital. In July 2019, they voted against us calling on the government ruling out a no-deal Brexit. They voted against the government offering a people's vote with the option to remain. On the 21st of October, 2020, they refused to call for the government to turn the failed national test and trace system into a locally led system. They refused in the same meeting to call for a full lockdown and to regret the fact the government hadn't gone sooner. They voted against criticising the former Conservative leader, Stephen Greenhalgh, for saying that Hammersmith residents should stump up £50 million to pay for the bridge. Then they voted against the government. Asking the government to drop a clause from the Health and Care Bill which could threaten Charing Cross Hospital by ending local consultation and letting the Secretary of State take the decision by himself to close it. What else did they do? We had the opposition leader talk about social housing, and in between the crocodile tears, she talked about building new homes. So why did she and all her colleagues vote against on 21st of October 2021, asking the government to drop its call-in of the plan to build 133 genuinely affordable new homes on the Clemathley estate, despite the impact of the delay on the lives of overcrowded families and those on the housing register? And then, of course, at the meeting just the last time, what do we have? They voted against the Labour administration's commitment to maintaining free home care.
Thank you,
So,
Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, all I can say is,
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, all I can say is when it comes to earning.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
I appreciate
Councillor.
the opportunity you've given me.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any other speakers? So just for the opposition, any other speakers? We'd like to turn the turn about? No? Okay, Councillor Cowan, please.
Look, this is the 7th year in a row that we have confirmed no rise for any councillors. And the first year, we cut salaries by 10%. Now, I wouldn't have brought that up. It wasn't something worth discussing because 7 years is a long time ago. But I don't know many people who cut their salaries. So most of the, and that's what we did. And then we've frozen it ever since. There's never been a salary rise. And that's what this paper argues to do. Now, if you've got hardworking councillors who are turning up to meetings, who are meeting with residents, who are working with officers, who are getting things done, then they should be paid a salary. And so it is quite right that we pay our cabinet members around £27,000 in total. The deputy leader's on about £32,000 and I'm on £38,000. And I've frozen that salary throughout the whole period. And we've also frozen the opposition salary as well. Additional to that, I would just remind the opposition that not only were they on 10% more when they were in office, they tried to put their salary up first by 14%, and they did it in the February budget, but they reversed it by the annual general meeting after we ran a public campaign about it. And then they tried to put it up by 14%. 14% and 18% rises, that's what they did. And we had great fun picking on the fact that they were giving themselves big rises, as well as, I would say at the same time, they did have a hospitality program that meant they did enjoy a lot of free dinners with developers, something they seem to be arguing was a good thing. I would say it's a bad thing. So you can look at the fact that we have more people in the administration, but the fact is, here you have a Labour administration, cut the salary, and you've got individuals in this administration that's on 10% cheaper and far better value than the previous Conservative administration. And that's what this paper asks people to vote to do. And I commend it, therefore, to everyone in the council.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? I've heard that the opposition aren't going to support this, so I suggest we now move to the vote. Yeah. So can I see all those in favour? Please show. All those against? Thank you. And not voting? Thanks very much. So for was 17, against was 10, not voting, I'm by myself again. So the report and recommendations are carried. We now move on to item 6.6, review of the Constitution. It's on page 218. And I call upon the leader of the council, Councillor Stephen Cowan, to move the report.
Formally moved.
Does anybody wish to speak on the item? No. I'll now move to the vote. Is the report and its recommendations agreed? The recommendations are carried. Item 6.7, appointment of an interim chief executive and interim head of paid services, exempt. The report is being classified as exempt within the meaning of the Schedule 112A of the Local Government Act 1972. The report has therefore been circulated to councillors only. Full council need to pass the following resolution. Under section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, that the public and press be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following item of business on the grounds that it contains the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 1 of section 12A of the said act. And the public interest in maintaining the exception currently outweighs the public interest in disclosing it. Is the resolution carried? Agreed? Agreed. Okay. That ends the open part of the agenda. And I would like to thank any viewers that have been watching for joining us. The live stream will now end as we go into closed session. But members, please stay on. If you're at home, there's no need to move on to the other session. So do not join the teams.